everyone. So we decided to go ahead and do another podcast style video, audio only, talking about the Hulu original series. I guess it's technically a Hulu original series, if you want to call it that. Castle Rock, hence the name of this video being Castle Talk. I thought that would be fun. Just a little pun, or play on words, I guess. I'm joined by my beautiful wife, Victoria.
Hello.
And also my son, who cannot talk at this moment.
Not yet.
He's still in the womb. Anyway, so we're going to be
process.
Yes, he's still baking. So today we're going to be talking about the Castle Rock, which is essentially a ode to Stephen King on Hulu. Just about every Stephen King ism, I guess, is really seen here. I guess it draws some influences from other things, like, I don't want to say it draws influence from Stranger Things, but I mean, I guess you can get that sort of vibe, streaming service, sort of darker series, I guess. But essentially it's about a guy who's found in a prison, locked away in a hole. Ironically, Shawshank Prison, which is of course famous from Shawshank Redemption, one of Stephen King's works. Now this series stars Bill Skarsgård as one of the main characters, Andre Holland, Jane Levy, Sissy Spacek, Melanie Linsky, and is produced by J.J. Abrams, Stephen King, and a bunch of other people. So just to let you guys know, this will have a lot of spoilers in it. We're probably going to get into all sorts of things. So just so you're forewarned, there will be plenty of spoilers if you have not seen the series. It is available on Hulu. All 10 episodes are all roughly 40 minutes to an hour each that you guys can check out now. So let's go ahead and get into talking about Castle Rock. So our first topic of conversation is going to be the very popular Bill Skarsgård, crush of yours, Victoria. If you want to get into that, I'm not sure. But let's go ahead and get into Bill Skarsgård's character. Now, this is his second Stephen King, I guess. I want to call it an adaptation because it's really not an adaptation. It's more of an original. His second time working with the Stephen King work. His first one being It, just a couple of years ago, which we both love very much. We saw it about 3 times in theaters, I think.
Yeah, and we own it too.
We watched it a lot. But he obviously plays Pennywise the Clown in It. In this one, he plays essentially a character named the Kid for the majority of the show. Essentially remains nameless or shrouded in mystery for all 10 episodes. Now, he just has that look of mystery, I guess, which I guess helps a lot.
I think what kind of help is that obviously we've seen Bill in somewhat limited works. And the majority of those works are kind of dark, kind of creepy. Yeah,
because he also did the Netflix original back when Netflix was really starting originals with Hemlock Grove, and he was very creepy in that.
Correct,
so.
And I think that's kind of how he got started in kind of like the more American television style of work. And I would say Hemlock Grove is very much Stephen King-ish in style.
Yeah, I mean, so mainly because I feel like Stephen King doesn't really work with a whole lot of vampires and werewolves. Kind of like, I mean, he does, but in a different
I just mean like if you were to compare the current shows that we have based on Stephen King's works or movies, the style of how it's kind of put together is very much kind of what we see on Castle Rock. But obviously we've kind of typecasted Bill in this types of work. So I think choosing Bill was it was a smart choice for this character. I think he's young and old enough to throw you off as if you think, okay, well, is this really a kid? Is this an adult?
In terms of like his age, you mean? Yeah,
and at least in the Castle Rock universe, he obviously kind of makes you think of, okay, kind of when they started in the talks of his age later into the show, it's kind of like, is he a kid? Is he an adult? Like, where are we here type of thing. But I think Bill's rendition of Pennywise the Clown had such a positive reaction, I think, from the Stephen King fans, which was a kind of a tough type of role to put together and like pull off, because I know that Tim Curry's
Very hard to live up
Pennywise
to. Yeah, very iconic.
is very loved, very iconic, very part of the Stephen King world. That doing a new one and pulling it off and making it just as loved with this new generation of it lovers isn't easy, but I think he pulled it off really well. I think he did really well in the movie. Obviously, that along with the kids that he worked with, I think everything put together plus Andy's work kind of made it really well put together.
And speaking of it, I just remembered that one of the kids from it is also in this series.
Yes,
and
that's
plays
right.
one of the main character's sons. So I think that's kind of interesting.
He kind of spoke in an interview recently that it was kind of nice to work with Bill outside of his Pennywise costume, and just kind of have a normal type of conversation with him. But I think the fact that he did so well in the Stephen King universe in his first shot that I think maybe even Stephen King himself was kind of impressed with what he did, and I think he was a really good choice for the role. I am aware from just listening to some interviews that they did during, I believe it was the San Diego Comic-Con, during the Castle Rock panel. They were talking about how when they casted the cast, they basically didn't really know where certain characters were going. The actors themselves didn't know. They were just kind of told, this is what you're going to be doing, and they kind of released some of these things, and they were kind of, just kind of working with what they had. And I think once you actually look at the show, I think he was a very smart choice. So I personally feel like he did really well in both in both Stephen King's work. I don't know what your opinion. Besides the fact that I do have a crush on the man.
Yeah, and it's definitely...
That's beside the point.
Yes, I'm sorry to out you. But I think it was really interesting to hear him, I guess, speak normally after the whole Pennywise thing, and it's very crazy and
speak normally.
I mean,
to a certain degree,
yes, yeah. But I mean, because he doesn't even talk for a good majority of the series. He probably doesn't even start talking full sentences until episode, I don't know, 8, 9 maybe?
I want to say more like 6 or 7, because it was when he was thrown into that. We'll get into that.
But it was just interesting to get a different side of someone that we've seen before and know can have that craziness, I guess. So.
And speaking of the cast, it isn't just Bill that pulls this show together. I think every single member of the cast was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone from the main cast, the gentleman that plays Henry Deaver, Cece Spacek, everyone did a really good job in the cast, and I think that kind of put the entire show together. I don't think there was any performance that you were like, this is off, that kind of takes you out of what you're watching, and that kind of...
And I think it also helped that everything is so shrouded in mystery in the town of Castle Rock that, and even if somebody was doing not as well as the others, maybe you might not even notice because they'll cut to some side story, it'll link back somehow, and they have some crazy past, or
And we have a pretty prestigious cast. I mean, Sissy Spacek is one of the queens of horror from back in the day, and all these things. So I think having this together kind of really worked. Now, obviously, I think the main topic of the show is trying to figure out who this kid is.
What the hell is going on
I think
in the town? I mean,
there's a lot of questions, but they start they all root out of who this person is.
Yeah.
Because Henry comes to town because he's called by a guard in Shawshank because they found this kid. And the kid, when he was found, the first thing he said was Henry Deaver. When they looked up information about Henry Deaver, they found that he was a lawyer, so they thought that he was asking for a lawyer. And then we have this guard who goes ahead and calls Henry Deaver, and that's why he's in town. So everything that happens from that moment on, it comes a root out of who is this person. And obviously we get more questions and zero answers until way later.
Yeah, I think that, when we were watching it together, just episode after episode, we would literally turn to each other and say, I have more questions than answers.
I don't think you get any questions answered until towards maybe episode 9. And even then, all of the questions you thought you had answered get completely just broken in front of your face in episode 10. So it's like, okay, now I don't know anything again.
Yeah, this show definitely is shrouded in mystery from beginning to end. Even when you get those answers that you've been dying for episodes and episodes, or, I mean, if you watched it when it was coming on week by week, you had to wait weeks until you had the answer. We had the benefit of coming in a little bit late, so we were able to binge a lot of those episodes back to back, so we could, I guess, build those questions further as the show went along.
I think,
but that's something that I always like in shows. It definitely keeps you interested, keeps you coming back, is that mystery. And the way they sort of tie a lot of them together and sort of like that main story, I don't want to call it a wrap-up, but like the way that essentially comes together towards the end, a lot of it makes sense, but again, we're still asking so many questions as to even what's real and what's not.
I think that's the biggest thing, is what is real and what isn't. Because the perspective that we get is Henry Deaver's perspective. Mm-hmm. And we look at Castle Rock in what we think is present time, which is the kid is a captive of Shawshank, and we don't really know who he is. He isn't speaking, so it's not like he's telling us who he is. Or is he? No. We don't know that, you know?
Yeah.
He keeps insisting. He doesn't say, please get Henry Deaver. What he says, when he's asked who he is, he says Henry Deaver. So that's the first question. Is this person Henry Deaver? Is this person asking for Henry Deaver? Now, we get a couple shots of Lacey, who is the director of Shawshank.
Yeah.
At the time, again.
I think it's in the very first episode?
No, I mean, like, we have
later.
Have him in general throughout the show. Mostly in flashbacks, because he dies in episode 1 with a hanging suicide that was creative.
I mean, I don't even know.
I don't even want to
call it hanging. It was more decapitation / car wreck.
It was a very gruesome way to kill yourself. He's dead, and that's how we find the kid. Now, all of the questions kind of start from there. Did he tell him to say Henry Deaver? Because we kind of get a flashback of that suggestion. Or is he Henry Deaver somewhere else? Because I think we've had in the Stephen King universe, at some point or another, some sort of semblance of like a multi-universe theory.
Yeah.
Also kind of like the time travel thoughts. Mm-hmm. So we all kind of think of, okay, this is a Stephen King story, so anything at this point is possible.
Yeah, and I mean, they even allude to that even in the opening credits. I mean, there's references to, I mean, even just like flipping through like the pages kind of thing with each actor's name type of thing. There's references to like Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, The Shining, like there's references. There's the It cover type of thing, like the newer version. So I mean, right off the bat, you get that sense that this is an ode to Stephen King. Like they're gonna get a bunch of Stephen King, I guess, isms.
Or Jackie. Jackie is a great example of those like universes kind of coming together. Because she is supposed to be like...
That's something I actually want to talk about in a little bit, is Jackie.
Yeah, we'll get into that. So there is this possibility from the very beginning, when you start theorizing about who this person is, is there a possibility that this is Henry Deaver in a different universe?
Well, I think that you don't even get that question until later on, because like right away they cut it out. They like, because he says Henry Deaver, and then like the other guard's like, who's Henry Deaver? Like the one who calls the actual Henry Deaver, and the other guard's like, it's some lawyer. Like they cut it out pretty quick to kind of make you
as you go into
throw
the
off
show,
the trail. I think
as you go into the show and he starts to act out more and more and more, and you're trying to find answers in any little crevice of the show. That is one of the theories that people can come up with. Yeah. Because yes, he is alluded to be the devil throughout the entire show, which is what most of us think he is. because he hasn't aged.
He kind of has that chaos, and there's this.
Yeah, like he seems to
people
cause.
saying, I saw you X amount of years ago, and you looked exactly the same.
People,
like that.
alluding to the fact that he looks exactly the same than he did 27 years ago, physically speaking. We know that Henry
Another
finds
very popular Stephen King number.
Yeah, Henry finds paintings of the kid in Lacey's house that are dated 1991, that are ages and ages ago, and he looks exactly the same in the picture as he does in current time, in the current date. So,
which we know is 2018. I mean, like
because they keep telling us that it is 2018.
Yeah.
So it's just this thought of, okay, we know he hasn't aged. That we know for sure. So why hasn't he aged? So at this point, I think everybody's trying to figure out, who is this person and where does he come from? Is he really the devil? Now, when we talked about the possibility of him being Henry, but from somehow somewhere else, or being the real Henry, maybe we hadn't even thought about the possibility of a multi-universe. We had just said, okay, maybe this is the real Henry. We also talked about the fact that maybe because he doesn't belong where he is, it's why he's causing all the chaos.
Yeah, sort of like the universe weeding out and knowing there's something that shouldn't be there.
Yeah. And
I know there's a word for that, but I can't.
We know we have Molly, who is the across the street neighbor from the Deavers, who has somewhat special powers.
Yeah, somewhat of. I mean, the way they sort of allude to it is like a connection between the two, but I think special powers would probably be the best way to say it. And
some would even say that it's kind of like similar to what The Shining is.
Yeah, I think that's about as best of a description as I can give it. I mean, she has this, I guess, magical is the best way to put it, connection with Henry all throughout their childhood. Little things like even when he's outside in the cold, she has like a breath type of situation, or like she knows when he's upset or like when he's awake or whatever. So she always has that connection, but we don't really know. They never really talk about what that connection is, and I feel
we also know that she has it with other people as well. She just happens to have it a little stronger with certain people.
Yeah.
Because she does have it with a kid as well, where she can feel him. And even she says, I feel like there's something different about this person. She's like, I felt people around me my whole life. And he feels different. So we know that she has the ability to read people, but some people better than others type of thing.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to The Shining when, I don't even remember. I think it's like Scatman Crothers or something like that played the guy at the Overlook Hotel, leaves and then comes back because he knows Danny has The Shining, as he calls it, and so because he knows he can feel he's scared or whatever, he comes back. I feel like that they very much made Molly, I don't know if it was because they wanted to have that sort of king connection, or if it was just genuinely some interesting thing that they're trying to build on, connection-wise between the two, or having her have The Shining without actually saying it's The Shining, because obviously she has no connection with the other characters that we know of as of yet anyway.
We do know that she happens to be the one character that seems to connect both, let's just call both Henry Deavers at this point, because that is our theory, to the same universe. Because Molly in both universes, assuming that this is what's going on, has been the key player in the two Henry Deavers type of thing. So she does have the ability to read them. And she's a big part in terms of telling the story of who Henry Deaver is, because we know that she was aware of where Henry was with his dad, who he happens to have a very rocky type of relationship with. We know that he's a pastor, but he has kind of like a dark past. And we know that Henry's mom was not very into their marriage, and she's found to be cheating with the sheriff, and we know the dad knows this, and was planning to sort of kill the mom at some point and kind of keep Henry to himself. And we know that Molly has this feeling that this is what's going on because she can sense it in Harry, which kind of ultimately makes her make some decisions throughout the show. But we know that Molly is like this big connection in terms of telling us her version of what happened to Harry in certain situations. So I think Henry's a very interesting character in the show because he himself doesn't know what the heck is going on. He thinks he's there to defend this person who was found to be captive for no reason, apparent reason. And then he starts to find out more things. Now, one of the interesting things about going back to the paintings, well, let me talk a little bit about the ending before we go to that.
Oh boy, here we go. This was a bit of a controversy in our own household, let alone the internet, but
yeah,
at least from my research on the show.
So on episode 8, we discover, or not discover, I guess the kid is in Molly's house. They're in Molly's room, and they're having a conversation, and he says, I'm Henry Deaver, like this is that's my house, pointing at Henry Deaver's house, and in the forest that's where you died. And that's how the episode ends, and we're all like, what do you mean she died? What do you mean you're Henry Deaver? What is going on?
And then episode 9 is where we get his
the reveal
backstory. Type of
thing. So we go back to the episode, I believe, starts with Bill's or Henry, the kids, Henry Deaver in the other universe, how he's a doctor, how he happened to, come to Castle Rock because of some issues with his mom. Or the dad had died, I think that's what happened. The dad passed away. And he had come to town, and then he was just checking around the house and happened to, I think one of the fuses of the house goes out, and he tries to check what's going on and goes to the basement. And then in the basement, he finds younger version of the other Henry Deaver.
That had disappeared in his own universe.
So now we're like, okay, we're all wondering why that Henry Deaver had disappeared in the first place. This would explain it. Now, how is this possible is what we're all wondering. So we find out that there's kind of like a gate between the two universes in the woods. And Henry finally crosses over with the help of Molly and Bill Skarsgård's Henry Deaver. But Bill Skarsgård's Henry Deaver happens to get stuck in the other universe, the same way that the kid Henry Deaver got stuck on Bill's universe in the first place. But this time, Bill's an adult, and he's trying to find his way, and gets captured by Lacey at this point. Now, towards the end, that's what we find out on episode 9. On episode 10, the rug gets pulled off our feet again, because we're all expecting this grand finale where Molly and Henry are going to take the other Henry into the woods, and he's going to be able to go back to his wife, and he's going to be able to go back to be a doctor, and that's not what happens. No. What happens is that Henry becomes the new captor of the kid and takes him back to Shawshank.
So Henry that we originally met, the lawyer, becomes the, I guess captor is the best way to say it. I don't want to say guardian, but like he's essentially the keeper of Henry from alternate universe. The kid.
He kind of becomes the new Lacey, basically, which is not at all what any of us was expecting to happen.
No, not even in the slightest. Especially, since they were alluding to very much apocalyptic type of consequences with Bill Skarsgård's character interacting with people and sort of having that, I guess, devilish sort of. And
I think that's what takes him to that, because I think at the end of the day we can't say that his decision wasn't really. There was no reason behind his decision. Right. He had seen with his own eyes what the kid was capable of around him, because they had just been in a prison cell together. We don't want to just tell you the entire show. They happened to be in a prison cell together, and in order to get out of the prison cell, the kid starts to cause all sorts of havoc in the prison. And Henry's like, okay, this person can make other people do things and can cause a lot of damage. A lot of people died in that scene. So I think he's just wondering, is he really telling me the truth, or is he just the devil and I'm just falling for it type of thing? So I think maybe that's what made him want to lock him back up.
And something I've always found interesting while at least doing some research into the show was there's a I don't remember what episode it is. It's in pretty early. There's a Twilight Zone episode that's like playing in the background. That Twilight Zone episode is essentially about a guy who goes to this castle and finds a guy like locked up. They tell him not to let him go. He like feels bad and lets him go, and finds out like that's the devil like embodiment or whatever. So then he goes out and wreaks all this havoc. And so he goes to catch him, and then eventually does. And I guess the whole moral on that Twilight Zone episode is that, like, you know, the devil can take like various forms and things like that. Even though like you may have good intentions, the devil can still sort of be present, I guess. And I think that was very much an inspiration for this series in general. I mean, it kind of even alludes back to that, because then I guess that Twilight Zone episode, he does end up catching him again, and then somebody else is like tempted to kind of like let him out, sort of situation.
And it just kind of starts.
And it just sort of starts to circle again. Yeah, exactly.
Now, I think it would be too simple for it to just be that. In my opinion.
I don't think it is that, but the references,
saying,
I guess.
Yeah. So. I'm just saying, like, let's assume that the reference is as if to say, okay, this is what's going on here. It would be too simple, considering the fact that Stephen King wouldn't make things this simple.
Of course not.
So, in my opinion, it's just like...
I mean, it alone, when I read it, it's like 1,000-something pages.
Yeah,
so not exactly simple.
And I feel like in this particular case, one thing that I really like about episode 10 is that it opens up with the same scene that opens episode 1, which is Henry in court talking about reasonable doubt. So it's kind of him putting that question in your head of, how much reasonable doubt are you guys okay with? Like, how much doubt are you okay with? So I think it's kind of teasing the audience of, we're going to leave you with so much doubt you're going to feel physically uncomfortable. And I think that's what happened here. Because we thought we had all the answers in episode 9, and then episode 10 completely throws it off. Because now we're all rooting for the kid. We're all thinking,
we're going to get
this
him back
guy
home.
is not his fault, all these things. But then he causes all this havoc, and then Henry's kind of forced to having to put him back. Putting him back does improve his life and improve the lives of the people around him. But is it because he's the devil and he needs to be put away, or is it because he's still this person that doesn't belong in this universe? This is my theory. The paintings are a big clue in this particular puzzle, in my opinion. If he was the devil, in my opinion, how come the paintings are able to cause as much damage to the people that are around him as Henry himself? Because if it was the devil that was causing all these things, he would have to be present in order to cause these issues. Assuming that's how it worked. Obviously, the devil is kind of like this figurative character that you can kind of make work in many ways. But I feel like the fact that there's a painting of a person that doesn't belong in that universe is what's causing the issues, which kind of feeds the theory of him being the Henry Deaver from the other universe. Now, the ending of the show is a little tricky because we have a really creepy shot of Bill Skarsgård kind of smiling in a creepyish way. So it's like, is he where he's supposed to be? Is he where he wants to be? People are kind of referencing how towards the end, Bill tells Henry Deaver that his end will be the same as Lacey's, and that this cycle will start again. Someone will find him, he'll get out, and so on and so forth. Is he waiting for those 27 years to pass to try and get out again? Is this kind of like a Pennywise situation where every 27 years this devil comes out and kind of causes all this havoc? I think there's so much of Stephen King's references in this that it just becomes overwhelming to the point where you're like, I have no clue what I'm looking at. I have no clue what's going on. I thought I knew something and I don't know anything. I don't know. I feel like that's just how it made me feel.
No, and I completely agree. I think my favorite theory, I don't really like the whole devil theory, to be quite honest with you. I like the universe, I guess, trying to balance itself, because the Henry Deaver that he is the biological son of the pastor and his mom, obviously. That's the kid, Bill Skarsgård version. Now, in the other universe, their child died, I think, during childbirth or during labor, something along those lines. So he does have a grave, but they end up adopting years later. So I feel like the universe trying to course correct itself and balance itself out, sort of idea is a lot better. Like it's trying to, it knows where that abnormality is and is trying to fix it by sort of, I guess, I don't want to say killing everyone that knows he's there, but a lot of the people that like come in contact with him visually, or like even with the paintings, or like see him around town, or just in his physical presence, end up either going crazy, dying.
I feel like it's the universe trying to find the person that's gonna put him away, because as he's put away, the universe kind of goes back to normal because he's being isolated from the world. So he is no longer a danger, so to speak, because he's being hidden from the outside world. So it's the universe saying, okay, we have to keep this thing that doesn't belong in this universe away so that it doesn't affect the people around them. But I also think this isn't a permanent solution to the issue. Like, you would still have to get him to cross over. Now, I thought it was interesting how they played with time. How in the other universe where Bill is a doctor, or where the kid is a doctor, and Henry Deaver, Lawyer Henry Deaver, is a child, he spends 27 years on the other side. But when he crosses over, he had only been missing for 11 days. So now, how long has this Henry Deaver been missing in his real world, assuming that's what's going on? Now, another thing that I kind go back to that to me is more of a evidence that he is in the wrong universe and not the devil, is the fact that Lawyer Henry Deaver keeps having flashbacks of when he was captive in the cage where Bill found him.
When he was missing for 11 days / 27 years.
So if this was just the devil making up a story to try and get out, how come Henry Deaver can have flashbacks of his time as a captive?
I mean, of course, those don't even make sense to us until 8, 9. Oh, I think 9.
Yeah, when Bill's Henry Deaver finds him.
Yeah.
It just kind of makes it. I know that Stephen King is notoriously known for leaving this kind of like open ending where you kind of have to figure out what happens. But I think this one, in my opinion, is one of the biggest, like, left open type of stories that we've seen.
And then to allude back to time itself and how long he has been where he's been, the ending of, I don't even know what to call it, creepy face, scary face, monster face, the kid. I've taking a look at it, I feel like that moment was very strange, because all of a sudden there was just, not only strange in just terms of story, but like then all of a sudden there was like this CG face there, and it just didn't match with the realism and like the grittiness that this show was essentially going for.
Oh, we're talking about the face that Bill makes towards the end?
Yes, yeah. And then also, in addition to that...
Oh, you're talking about the monster face in the forest.
Yeah, like the monster face.
I thought you were talking about the ending scene.
No, sorry. About the monster face in the forest.
That's another thing that completely throws off the story. It's like, what is this in relation to everything else?
And I feel like that they try and like reference that as part of like... It's saying, like, he's been here for a really long time. Like, he's living this almost like a cycle of hell and, like, torture and being locked up for over and over again. We don't necessarily know how long he's been there. We assume 27 years based on the events that have happened in the story. But assuming
he did say that he's been waiting 27 years for this moment when he's talking to Henry. So we know he's been there for 27 years.
Right, but that face doesn't allude to 27 years older.
But I don't think that's what... I don't think that, personally, that's what it's alluding to. Because I think where you're going is that he's aging, and that's kind of like what he's really supposed to look like. But I don't think that's what's happening in that scene. Because even if he was... Let's assume that 27 years had passed... His face would still not look like that, because let's assume that the kid
was 25, like
26. 27 years later, he would still not look that old. What I think it's going on here is that we have enough, let's call it evidence, to think that he's the devil, as we do to think that he is Henry Deaver. So that's where the whole reasonable doubt thing comes in. It's like we don't have more of one and less of the other. We have almost the same amount of proof for each theory. So that makes it even harder for you to say, I'm sticking with this one because this is it. You know? For me, I was like, okay, the pictures and, the flashbacks and all these things to me is enough. And then I think about the face. The face, both faces, the one in the forest and the one at the end. when he does that creepy smile. That creepy smile to me was worse than the one we saw in the forest, because he's just being put in the cage.
Yeah.
If you're a man, a normal man, that's being put back into captivity for God knows how long is it gonna be this time. After having a very close shot at being back with your wife and in your life, you wouldn't make that creepy face towards the end. I think you'd be bummed, because he looks sad from the majority of that scene until that little bit towards the end. So it's just like, people were saying, because I was following some of the theories on Tumblr and Reddit, and people were talking about how that face means that he's exactly where he wants to be. As if I am this monster that comes out every certain amount of time. But in the process, there's this one kind of hero that keeps me hidden for this amount of time until I find ways to basically fuck with their heads for long enough that I can kill them off, get out, cause all sorts of havoc, be put back in, and so on and so forth.
And I think that they really want it to be that open-ended where conversations like this end up happening.
Yeah.
And, like, we can just sort of build the conversation, talk about it, have other people, bring them in, things like that. I don't want to call it necessarily a marketing strategy, but I guess that's kind of what it is. That word-of-mouth version, whether it be written and on the internet or just us talking about it here. We talk about it because we don't know, and there's just so many questions and open ends that it's hard to say this is the one definitive answer.
I don't think there is a definitive answer, as much as we would like to find one. And I think I get why the audience is so upset, because I'm certainly one of those people. I'm still upset because I like things that kind of make sense at the end, and I think we all do. We like, that even end where we're like, okay, we're happy and content with what happened. But I think here, we're not getting that at all. But I feel like if we would have gotten that, we would have gotten completely out of what Stephen King really is about. And I think the fun thing about the show, when you really think about it outside of the box and not just thinking about how you have to live with all these questions now, is that the fun thing was just kind of picking up the little Easter eggs all throughout Jackie Torrance and all these little things. Just little, finding little, kind of like an homage to Stephen King throughout the show. So it's like, this character reminds me of this. This is happening in Shawshank. Oh, we have Jackie Torrance, which is basically the female version of Jack Torrance. And it's all these little things that you kind of pick out at. And then an open ending, which is very notorious of Stephen King, and then just kind of put it together and say, okay, now you guys figure it out, type of thing. No, I don't think we're going to get answers, to be honest. Because
I don't think so.
From what I've read online, the second season is going to be something completely isolated from what happened on the first one. So I think we're just going to have to learn to live with it.
I think it's going to be very much like an American Horror Story type of situation where, they'll be willing to bring certain people back even though it's, very different theme, or...
I don't think so, mostly because I like to watch... In Hulu, you have the episodes, and then you have behind the episodes. And in the last one, the directors and producers of the show are sitting together, and they're talking about how the kid might come back, and Henry Deaver might come back. So there is a possibility that it won't be completely, because Jackie seems to be the next kind of focus point of the series, still from Castle Rock.
Yeah.
And even if she travels to the hotel to do a kind of a take on The Shining, she might have to come back to Castle Rock at some point, so that might come up again. So I'm not completely closed up to the possibility of this being kind of cookie cutter like American Horror Story. I think there might be some mix up, and knowing how Stephen King is, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting for them to not sort of do that anthology type of thing. It's anthology, where it's different every season, right? I think it would be better if they didn't do that, although I think it would be cool. I think it's going to be hard, number one, because Bill Skarsgård's blowing up really fast. And I think that they can really keep it a lot more connected with the King's works. Jackie already had an incident with an ex. She was writing essentially a story about a hotel at the very end and saying that she wanted to go there to finish the story type of thing, obviously referencing to The Shining.
She's supposed to be his niece, because she talks about how that's not her name, that she took it from her uncle, who had been killed with an axe or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And then she says, so I took his name. So we know that she's Jackie Torrance because of Jack Torrance type of thing. So we know that they're family.
Do you think that this could allude even further into King's works and try and say in season 2, assuming we go to the Overlook Hotel, whatever, that they try and incorporate something more with her, I guess, cousin at that point, being Danny, like an adult Danny or like something along those lines.
I think that would be the most interesting take on it. I think it can be overdone though, because it would be too obvious if all it is about the Shining and the Overlook Hotel.
Well, I think they're going to very much play with it like they did this one, where there's influences.
It's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I think so too. I think, and I wanted to ask you about this because I am not entirely familiar with the timeline of when The Shining is supposed to be happening, but considering when it took place, does Jackie seem young or old enough to be his niece?
Well, I mean, assuming that, in actual time type of thing, I don't think it quite matches up, because I think Jane Levy's in probably, I guess, around 26, 27 ballpark. I don't think that would match up. Unless she has the stories of her family without her being born yet, like her mom told her about it later type of thing.
I think that's what she said. I don't think she met him. She's just I find this story very interesting. Because she does talk about how she finds Castle Rock to be kind of a boring town or a boring town in her time of life, because nothing's happening. There's no murders or whatever. And then she talks about the story about how her uncle was a psychopath or whatever, but as in he's dead, but I've heard all the stories type of thing.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, when is The Shining supposed to be happening in terms of year?
I want to say very late 70s, early 80s.
Okay, so it would make sense, because assuming that Jack Torrance is in maybe his late 30s, early 40s in the show, not in the show, in the movie, we can say that he could definitely be her uncle right now. So I guess the story would match in terms of time. I don't really know. The movie came
out in 1980, but in terms of being set...
But in the book.
Oh, in the book? I don't really remember exactly what year it's...
Okay, well, let's assume it's somewhere in the 70s. It would add up. I don't know exactly where they're going to go with that. I just think that's going to be some of the interesting aspects of the next season. I just kind of hope that they come back to Castle Rock so we can have...
Yeah, and I think that also... Okay, so the publication date of The Shining was 77. And based on, Stephen King's sort of... encounter with the hotel that inspired it, he stayed there around 74, I think, somewhere around there. So mid to late 70s, I guess, would be the time frame of when it's set. But then they also have the opportunity to incorporate another King work, which I haven't gotten the opportunity to read yet, which is Dr. Sleep, which is about Danny when he's grown up. And so I think that they can sort of bring in those aspects too. Obviously, you don't want to keep it so focused, but if you do sort of a main theme King book or story every season, but sort of incorporate different aspects, I guess.
I think the tricky thing about making it about Danny is this. In the entire Castle Rock season, we don't see any, let's call it real, for lack of a better word, real Stephen King characters.
Sure.
So having a real one with a backstory that has already been written into a book would have to have some level of accuracy when it comes to shooting the show. And it would limit what the directors can do with the character, because they have to stick to whatever we know about Danny from these two books. So if they wanted to go more open, kind of what they do with Castle Rock, they have to stay away from that.
Yeah.
If they're really focused on this is what we want to go for, then that's going to limit a little bit what they can do, in my opinion, because this is a real character in a real Stephen King book or novel. So, because we know how Castle Rock is real, so we can go back and reference and say, this is inaccurate, kind of like what we do with books. Yeah. That's why it's so open-ended, and it's just us trying to figure out the plot holes. But they can do that with Danny, because Danny is a real character, so it just makes it a little more difficult, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know where they're going. They've been super ambiguous with it.
But that's part of the fun, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm really excited to see what's coming. I'm nervous and anxious in terms of, like, are they going to do the same thing that they did with the first season?
Are they going to build us up for 8-9 episodes?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that if it is going to focus on Jackie, we do know that Jackie exists in the same universe at the same time when the kid is locked up. So there's only so much they can ignore before she brings that up again, I think. So I think it's going to be brought up, even if it's just kind of like as a background thing.
Yeah, because, I mean, she had encounters with him. So,
yeah,
I mean,
she met him and had situations with him, and she can't just pretend like it's not there. But I just think the show was done beautifully, beyond the plot hole and beyond the story not having kind of
garbage can on
having
fire
so many like loose ends. I think it was a beautiful show. I thought it was shot beautifully. I thought there was a lot of Stephen King, which is nice and very kind of like honoring what he does. And then you have a lot of J.J. Abrams style of producing and putting a show together. And even though it was done by different directors, you can't really seem to see the differences, because I think that's a lot of things directors kind of run into. Is when you have a series or something that is directed by different people, you can tell when you put them together that they weren't done the same way. Like, this might be a ridiculous example, but you have the Twilight series, for instance, who were shot, or the Harry Potter series, who were all done, most films were done by different directors. They look different, they feel different. The characters feel different, sometimes darker, sometimes lighter. So here it was done very evenly and very nicely, to the point where you're still feeling like you're watching the same show, which is very important when you're binge watching, which is something that you can do easily on Hulu.
Yeah, it's a lot more difficult. I mean, it's a lot easier, I guess I should say, to pinpoint all those differences when you're binge watching versus a Harry Potter movie every year.
Happens every year,
whatever.
yeah. And even then, you can still point them out. Imagine if you can binge watch the episode. So I think that was done really well. The casting was great. The story itself, as an homage to Stephen King, was done beautifully. I just think, obviously, as an audience member, it's just kind of frustrating to not have your answers. But I think overall, the show is brilliant, and it's definitely worth watching.
Yeah, I definitely think it was one of the better shows that I looked forward to watching. I mean, there's always those shows you look forward to watching, but this one having all of those mysteries, which is another thing that I love. Having so many questions and trying to put a puzzle together or things like that just make cohesive sense, or that just a general adventure that you can go on trying to solve a mystery. I feel like somewhat that this series was more about the journey than the destination sort of phrase, because the journey was a roller coaster.
Oh, it definitely is.
The destination was a bit disappointing. It's like maybe going to the Grand Canyon and saying that's a big hole in the ground.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you got that cross-country adventure sort of thing. So, I mean, I definitely really enjoyed that. As far as the Stephen King stuff, even though I obviously haven't read every single one of his works, I've read a few.
And I'm going to admit I was a little bit hesitant about Castle Rock, because...
Why was that? Why was that?
Because I felt like, okay, this is Hulu, what are they trying to do? I mean, is this going to be... Because I think Hulu doesn't have as many originals as Netflix does.
I mean, they're certainly building their library, but
yeah.
I feel like Netflix has the jump in that.
Yeah, and with Netflix, we already have the experience of what we've seen. And I was kind of hesitant. I was like, is this going to be good or worth watching? And my gut kind of told me, okay, let's trust the fact that J.J. Abrams is involved, that this is a Stephen King story, that Bill Skarsgård is involved. Like, let's just give it a shot. And then I was blown away. It just completely exceeded my expectations of what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I agree.
It catches you and it traps you immediately. It's one of those shows, kind of like, as much as I hate to compare it because it's obviously not nowhere near the same level of quality, but you have like 13 Reasons Why, where you have the first episode and there's this one little scene where you're like trapped forever.
Right.
And there's nothing else you can do to like leave because now you have all these questions. Every single episode of Castle Rock adds more questions to your plate. And zero answers until almost towards the end. And you get a few answers, kind of peppered in, not really giving you answers. So it traps you, and I think that's what a good show is supposed to do. It's supposed to captivate you and just say, I want to keep watching. And even though we had quite a few episodes to watch before we ran out, we were still looking forward to Wednesdays to watch a show. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that a good show is supposed to do, and this one definitely nails that.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and I really look forward to whatever may be coming in the future, how it may connect or not connect to the season. I feel like there's so many different directions it can go, and I think that's kind of scary, but also a lot of fun.
I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm really glad that we know that there's going to be a second season coming. It's refreshing to see something different on TV nowadays, I think.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think beyond the negativity of, this doesn't answer any questions, overall the show is brilliant.
Yeah,
and I thought it was
it's shot well, written well, for the most part.
Yeah.
It just has so many great things going for it, and I mean, you said it yourself, and I completely back it up 100%. I definitely recommend it's definitely even worth at least if you only spend a month on Hulu or whatever, or use the free trial just to binge through that series and then be done with it.
Yeah,
it's totally
you don't even have to be a hardcore Stephen King fan to see and understand the references. I myself, I'm not one of those people. I know some of Stephen King's works, especially It and The Shining are some of my favorite. I've seen Thin, and I've seen some of the other ones. I think it's called Thin.
The Thinning or something like that.
But I'm not a hardcore fan, and my knowledge is very limited in terms of his works. But I think they allude to this little clues here and there so well that you could recognize him even if you're not a hardcore Stephen King fan. And I think that's how they made this so beautiful and so fun to watch and pick out the Easter eggs here and there. So I think it's definitely worth watching.
Yeah, for sure.
And kudos to Hulu because they really pull this together.
Yeah, definitely made me a believer in Hulu.
Absolutely.
I was definitely big on the Netflix train, but this is totally worth checking out. Highly recommend it. Like I said.
And Hulu.
Yeah, check out Hulu. Check out Castle Rock.
It's actually very fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of great movies. I mean, usually whenever they take something off Netflix, somehow it ends up on Hulu. So, I mean, you get kind of the best of both worlds if you're wanting to do both. They definitely have a great variety there. But anyway, all 10 episodes of Castle Rock are now available on Hulu. Definitely check them out. They're worth the 30-day trial, 1-month subscription, whatever you want to do. Definitely worth that. But I think that's all we really have about Castle Rock. Great series. Definitely recommend checking it out. So that's pretty much all we have for Castle Rock. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, listening in to this video podcast style. We have a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun doing this.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we can look forward to doing something similar or setting up like a series of these, whether it be about series themselves, movies, whatever movie in general we feel like talking about. Definitely a lot of fun, and I enjoy having you. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you guys for joining me as well. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you guys so much for watching / listening, and I hope you guys have a good one.